I'll start. Hi, everyone. My name is Lozana Rossenova, and I'm really happy to be speaking here today about the Jonas knowledge base, and more specifically, the linked open data research that we did in that project. The project was led by a very multidisciplinary team, and our project directors were Barbara Clausen, Deena Engel, and Glenn Wharton. Today, I'll be speaking in my capacity as Assistant Director for Linked Data Research. The slides and the presentation today were co-written and co-designed with the Technology Research Director of the project, Deena Engel. And I'm also super happy that the Curatorial Director, Barbara Clausen, is able to join the session today and help me introduce the project and contextualize it more specifically from an academic and GLAM background. So with this, I will move on to the next slide, and I will hand over to you, Barbara.
Hi, everyone. We can go to the first slide. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Jonas Knowledge Base. My name is Barbara Clausen. I was the Curatorial Research Director together with Glenn Wharton and Deena Engel. And thank you, Lozana, for this intro. I also want to mention the other person that was really working close with us was Kristen Poor as the Associate Curatorial Director. And of course, Alison Kalb, who also worked a lot on the web page design and then leading to Lozana's work and Deena's work with Wiki. So the Jonas Knowledge Base is an open source digital resource housing information about one of the most famous New York artists, the multimedia and performance artist Jonas, born in 1936, who's been at the vanguard of interdisciplinary art forms such as performance, video art, and new media since over 5 decades. And this was an academic project between New York, Montreal, and Los Angeles. And it is part of the Artist Archive Initiative, which is based in New York City at the Fales Library. And the mission is really to dedicate and provide useful information for conservators, curators, researchers, and other artists to learn to learn more about an artist's work. And specifically, we decided to work with very few case studies. So this is not an artist website. It is also not a catalogue raisonné, nor is it an infinite archive, but it is really a knowledge base which focuses on only 2 artworks, Organic Honey, which began in 1972, and Mirage, 2 multimedia performances that have then been turned into installations. They were performed numerous times over the 70s and then turned into installation by 1994. So we really wanted to focus on artworks that have a really fluctuous and changing life as artworks, and to really see what happens within the history of each artwork. And we researched these 2 artworks for over 4 years and then added 3 exhibition case studies. We did this with the help of the artist and her archive. Most of the material that one would see on the Jonas Knowledge Base has never been cataloged, has never been inventorized. It's really in the artist studio. It's materials that the artist still works with every day. Thank you, Lozana, for the next page. It's really important to, so to say, do a really deep dig into 2 artworks and show all the resources from notebooks to floor plans, interviews, chronologies, exhibition materials, archival materials, sources, and of course interviews with the artist, but also with conservators, collaborators, and other curators familiar with Joan's work. And so that was really where we started, and we really wanted to structure the WordPress site in a way that it is sustainable, easy to maintain, but also really immediately accessible to the public. And so to kind of really go into the artist's active archive and to make that accessible in the moment that work, those documents are still used. And obviously there's also this idea of it being a process-based project, so that the Jonas Knowledge Base will continue to grow, will continue to become larger. And that's, of course, where the work of Lozana and Deena was so important, to actually go beyond the portal of the WordPress site, but to really make it seep out into the world. And with that, I pass on to Lozana to explain more about the technology side behind this project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara, for joining us and for this excellent introduction to the richness and beauty of this project. So I would quickly go over now the core project goals, which you already summarized some of this, but I just have these slides prepared. So the project goals included building out this narrative that captures art historical, curatorial, and conservation research, building out the data set that captures all of this research as well, and then sharing the resources, documenting the approach throughout, so all of the workflows, and ensuring the long-term preservation of the resource. Now, to achieve these goals, Deena and in collaboration with the rest of the team and myself developed several systems goals and decisions around how the system would work. So I will now go a little bit more in detail into these, and then I'll dive deep into the Wikidata side of things. So first of the system goals was making a commitment to use open source software, both to save on cost and as an expression of commitment to open source software and making cultural heritage research accessible to all. Next, selecting the WordPress as an open source, widely used and widely supported CMS to host the narrative results of the work. Using linked open data for the dataset. So it became clear pretty much early on that the material that we were working with in this project did not neatly fit into a traditional hierarchical schema, such as an SQL database. As Barbara already explained, we're working with performance artworks here, which consist of many components, including objects such as drawing, audio, video, other media. All of these need to be linked together. Performance arts happens over time, and thus new iterations of the artworks also need to be linked together. And finally, performance art involves typically collaboration with other artists and working with more than one institution whose data also needs to be linked together. Therefore, we saw linked open data as an opportunity to capture the complex relationships among all the various types of entities in the data and the facts represented by these relationships. We further decided to host our dataset on Wikidata in order to support cross-institutional and international discoverability for research purposes. It is worth noting that we researched two further open source options to either use Semantic Media Wiki or Wikibase, but we determined that both of these alternatives required more overhead and support than would be reasonable for this particular research project and also other small arts organizations. Next, we relied upon OpenRefine to prepare and upload our dataset into Wikidata. OpenRefine is a free and open source data wrangling and reconciliation tool, which is widely used in digital humanities and in the GLAM field. And of course, there are many OpenRefine sessions throughout the 2 days of the conference, the community sessions today and tomorrow. And lastly, by using Wikidata, we facilitate the use of Sparkle, a query language for working with linked open data. We have prepared a set of sample Sparkle queries that pull real-time results from the Wikidata query service. And we then integrate the results into our resource in order to guide users to explore the dataset. And we also seek to provide suggestions and resources for users who wish to build their own Sparkle queries to research Jonas' works or works in their own collections. So as Barbara already mentioned, the WordPress portal hosts the essays, the documentation, and other written materials alongside images, audio recordings, interviews with transcripts, and more. And now I want to focus on our work with Wikidata. We use Wikidata to host a sample dataset associated with people, artworks, institutions, and events encountered in the JJKB, and enrich that dataset with additional data that was already in Wikidata, such as bibliographical data about people, artwork, or exhibition data from some of the institutions which had collected or exhibited Jonas' works, geodata about locations as well, and external identifiers linking to various authority-controlled data sources. So this is an example of the spreadsheets that we started working with in the beginning. Research data that was originally compiled by the curatorial team was discussed collaboratively with the technology team in order to coordinate what data was going to be used for the final dataset to be uploaded to Wikidata. In this example spreadsheet, you can see raw data for several performances of the case study artwork Organic Honey. Data cleaning and preparation followed suit. This workflow included formatting the data so that it can be easily interpreted with tools such as OpenRefine and structuring the data into a schema that is compliant with Wikidata's own data modeling principles. In this example spreadsheet, you can see data for various performances of the second case study artwork Mirage. To prepare the data for upload, we went through this process of thinking in triples. In terms of transforming the data into simple statements consisting of a subject, predicate, and an object. This transformation workflow followed several principles, such as concept simplicity, In other words, accepting that not all nuance can be transferred from narrative text into data, nor is it necessary to do so in order to extract useful information when querying the database. To take advantage of the affordances of the semantic environment of Wikidata, concepts should be kept relatively simple. However, every mention of a concept can be referenced to a particular textual narrative source where richer detail may be provided. For example, many of the works in the JJKB feature complex arrangements of objects which have been documented in varying degrees of detail. It may not be possible, or at least not practical, to document the minutiae of every object's characteristic or position in relation to an artwork instantiation. However, it is possible to document that specific works had floor plans or scripts, and the latter can be referenced with links to specific textual documents. Another principle related to the idea of thinking in triples was to work with spreadsheets in ways that made our workflow with OpenRefine more practical. For example, using separate spreadsheets for each type of thing in the dataset, splitting multiple values for a single property in separate columns for each spreadsheet, etc. Finally, we had to integrate our dataset into the existing ecosystem of Wikidata's own flavor of structured data, and we use Wikidata's the properties in Wikidata creatively. In other words, within the constraints of the system, but exploiting these constraints when there were no fixed solutions or guidelines for the specific case of performance art. So to determine how we could use properties in creative ways, in other words, ways that suit the specific needs of the JJKB dataset, we first reviewed existing resources within Wikidata to determine what were the general conventions for representing art-related data. We consulted resources such as the Wikidata project page for visual arts. However, we quickly discovered that much of the conventions there were established for more traditional and fixed art forms, such as paintings and sculptures, and did not fully meet our needs. We also consulted the way other institutions, such as MoMA or the Tate in London, among others, have already been documenting Jonas' works in their collections and the corresponding records in Wikidata. Finally, we also drew on this resource, which I developed during my own PhD research with Rhizome. I worked with experts in the fields of digital and performative arts, as well as experts in the Wikidata ontology system, in order to develop a wiki project which maps relevant properties in Wikidata and documents how they can be standardized across institutional use cases. After consulting all available reference materials and considering the needs of the researchers who are working with their dataset, we chose a limited set of properties and defined specific ways these properties related to data in our dataset versus how they operated within the general Wikidata ecosystem. We aim to align and map our use of properties as much as possible to what data regarding Jonas and her works was already entered in Wikidata in order to make the connections and cross-referencing with data from other institutions more accessible. If you're interested in exploring further the entirety of the data model that we developed in the end, and by data model, I mean the classes of data and the property relations between classes, you can consult this overview diagram available on the JJKB website. There are a few specific lessons learned while developing the JJKB data model that I think are worth sharing today. And we can discuss these more later in the discussion or the Etherpad, etc., in the social spaces. First, one of the questions that was a concern from the start was how to bind a small data set amidst the vastness of Wikidata. When reusing the data later to search or visualize it in specific ways, it would be good to be able to request all data from the JJKB without missing something. Equally, on occasion, it might be helpful to distinguish between data that comes from the research team of the JJKB versus data that comes from other sources. So our solution was to add the statement described by source, JJKB, to all new items created for the JJKB research dataset. But it was not ideal in some cases. For example, when working with artists in exhibitions that span beyond the boundary of the JJKB, such as Richard Serra or Documenta 6, obviously like very famous examples, which contain a lot of data outside of the scope of the JJKB. A further concern was working within the constraints set by other knowledge domains, which do not meet the needs of performance and avant-garde art practices. An example here was the constraint that the location of an artwork cannot be different from the location of the collecting institution. But this doesn't really work for performance artworks, which subsequently enter a collection. Further, there were various constraints around time and temporality, like not being able to add a list of several non-consecutive days, which is the case, obviously, for a lot of performances. So in such cases, we're able to use workarounds, but the workarounds limit the possibility to fully query the data, and longer-term solutions, such as, for example, the proper integration of extended data type format as a data type in Wikidata, would be good to be discussed further with the community. Finally, after all data is cleaned, modeled, and uploaded to Wikidata, of course, the next question is how to reuse the data in ways that support further research. In the JJKB, we rely on Wikidata Sparkle endpoint to ask questions of the data and to render data visualizations based on our research. As we have continued to add data into Wikidata about Jonas' work, and resulting data tables and data visualizations have become more complex, more robust, and will hopefully lead to new and interesting ways to study this artist's exciting works. We have developed a dedicated chapter on linked open data in the knowledge base as a toolkit for studying contemporary performance art and Jonas' works in particular. We encourage scholars in many areas of contemporary art to study this toolkit in order to explore and research visual works in your own fields. As part of the toolkit, you will find many examples of the data visualizations that are rendered via the Wikidata query service so that you can explore the artist's works and contextualize and literally see the data about these works in new and exciting ways. Some of the ways the data can be presented include a dimensions visualization, which highlights the relationships between discrete instantiations of the works and in our dataset. A timeline visualization, which contextualizes the temporal dimensions of events and performances. Or an interactive map visualization, which locates venues. Other types of visualizations include bar or bubble charts, tree maps, and graphs. I also want to emphasize that all queries and corresponding visualizations that were developed for the JJKB and integrated in the main website for the knowledge base were developed through a highly collaborative process across all teams on the project. It was important to design the queries and the default visualizations chosen for each query with the needs of the researchers in mind, while maximizing the potential of each query and each visualization to showcase the varied, complex, and at times surprising connections that could be discovered in the JJKB dataset. And here I'm really showing behind the scenes work, but you can sort of see our, version history, how literally all parts of, different teams were pitching in and giving feedback on, how to structure these queries. One more interesting aspect of the technical workflow is that our tech director, Deena Engel, wrote a Python script that pulls the Sparkle query code from the collaborative spreadsheets to generate HTML pages on the JJKB website for each query. And this keeps the system literally lively, right? The pages can be automatically regenerated if there are new research updates. To sum up, to be able to work effectively with linked data in an open environment like Wikidata, it is important to source, select, and model data in particular ways which enable complex relations to be drawn. In the linked open data chapter, we therefore also provide more general resources to help researchers and GLAM professionals get started with the preparation and uploading of their data in Wikidata. Finally, we provide a range of tutorials in this chapter. Our tutorials offer step-by-step instructions, detailed screenshots, and a video to help you get started writing queries on your own. We hope you will enjoy exploring the linked open data chapter and the rest of the numerous resources available in the JJKB. And I'll just like to end now with many, many thanks to the incredible team behind this project, really huge team, like Barbara said in the beginning, not just the director team, but assistant directors, student researchers. Barbara, you might want to pitch in here with.
Yeah, we just gave a talk. We had 17 research students, several advisors. We had an advisory board of 12, and our smallest mailing list, just to get in touch with the people for copyright and just for all kinds of questions and issues that we're involved in working, include about 180 people. So just to give you an idea, when we speak about these projects, they're so inherently collaborative, and I think that's really, if anything, we hope that the Jonas knowledge base will really represent that. Thank you so much, Lozana, also for your work on this.
No problem. So I think I aim to finish early, so we have at least 5 minutes for questions. I also wonder if Deena might be in the chat. She mentioned she will try to join us, but I don't see her, so maybe not. Unfortunately, our tech director, Deena, she was hoping to be here today, but she couldn't. But if anyone has any questions, we are here. You can also add questions in the Etherpad. I have put a link to the slides in the Etherpad if anyone is interested in looking them in more detail.
And I've added also the link to the Jonas knowledge base.
It looks like there is one question in the Etherpad. Did you look at Wiki Project Performing Arts for the data modeling of performances?
Yes, I did, but I think a lot of it, I think there were some good tips there around dates specifically, but I found at the time, especially because this was happening last year, and I don't know, maybe there were more updates later, because I did see yesterday that a project page being highlighted as like really a model page, and I felt like last year I still couldn't see too much detail there about performance art, which is actually different from performing arts. So it's a bit confusing, but yeah, I mean, we can speak about this more, but performance art is more fine art, and performing arts can be theater, opera, concerts, etc. So I feel like the modeling needs were quite different, especially thinking about the New York avant-garde that Barbara and her team were researching. That was oftentimes I found the data was sort of really on purpose actually challenging, right? Like these artists were experimenting with categories and traditions, and it wasn't easy to fit.
Yeah.
The visual arts were I think the visual arts project page was helpful in terms of thinking about parts and wholes. That was actually quite interesting. And we did speak quite a lot with various people involved in some of these projects. I remember speaking with Carly Wildenhouse from the Frick reference library. She's a metadata librarian there, and Carly gave us quite good tips on some of the particularities around parts and wholes, and also around this binding a small data set inside Wikidata, right? The described by source. I think this was something that Carly had developed as a convention alongside a team of other metadata librarians. I think maybe working in Stanford. I have to like double check, but definitely Carly Wildenhouse was really helpful in thinking through the Wikidata ontology side of things. So there's also a question from Susanna. Are there projects you can already share your data model with? Well, I would say all performance art in Wikidata could use this data model. The data model is open on the JJKB. I can also put a link to that in data, but if you go into JJKB in the linked open data chapter, you'll find it. And I hope, actually, we didn't have a chance to do this, but I hope to have a chance to speak more with curators from MoMA and Tate, because actually those museums have some of their collections in Wikidata, and I have seen some Jonas artworks there. But one of the challenges I found with their collections is obviously they very much think about items, right? So they would enter the artwork into Wikidata and as if it's like a solid unit, whereas we were thinking about instantiations. I mean, this really came through from the research that Barbara and Christine and their team were working on. And this idea of instantiation, so the multiple variations on each performance and each installation being its own item in the database. I think we found that quite difficult to reconcile with the way museums were thinking about these things as like this solid unit. But yeah, I would be super happy if someone else wants to use our model for more performance art in Wikidata. And maybe even the performing arts. I mean, instantiations of theater, versions of productions could also be fun.
Thank you for the presentation. I would like to close it because we are over with the time. So
thank you. I'll just mention that if people have more questions, I see one that's actually quite interesting. If they put it in the Etherpad, we can answer it there for sure after the session.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Good question. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for